Welcome everyone to Breaking Token Curated Registries. My name is Nick. I work with a project called GovernX. We're under consensus, the succubus of Ethereum, and we've been building a lot of governance products, kind of in stealth. Aragon and others know about us. We talk occasionally, but eventually it'll all get released and everyone will be able to use it. But for now, I'd like to present kind of a really crazy thing that's starting to happen, and as well show some of the weaknesses of this crazy thing, and then also show people that we should be critical, but we should also be super intrigued by whatever the hell this thing is, because it's fantastic. So let's get started. So before Token Curated Registries, I just want to leave you guys with an idea, which is that human work DAOs will change the world. So it seems a little crazy right now to say this because it's pretty early on, but and the last DAO we tried blew up, but. The thing is, we shouldn't stop there. There's incredible work to be done, and the governance field is really expanding, and I think a lot of the projects are really traversing the space in a really interesting way. So yeah, I just want to leave you with that thought before we start. So for the agenda, what we're going to do is I'll walk you through what a Token Curated Registry is. I'll show you a bit about if you were to build one right now in this room, what that would kind of entail. Why are they useful? What are the problems? How can we fix those problems? What can't be fixed at the moment? And addressing some assumptions about these crazy DAO structures. So what are Token Curated Registries? So a TCR is a decentralized way to curate a list, and a list for any application or any protocol. So it's really, really, really simple. It's just, we have this organization. It's raised by a token. And this token membership is going to organize itself to do one thing, which is effectively curate a list for whatever it's supposed to be doing, and hopefully do it very well. So the process of doing this kind of works like this. I buy a token in a crowd sale, or I'm given a token, or I create a token because I'm just myself and I just do this, to myself. I take these tokens and then I make applications. The applications are simple. They're just, I want to add X thing to this particular list, and I'm going to put a certain amount of stake on this application. Then other token holders can come along and say, sure, I think your application's fine. Your item can go on our magical list. Or they can say, no, screw you. I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to put some stake against your item getting on this particular list. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, everyone in the token organization, this application is clearly bad. We should challenge it, and we should remove it. And so effectively, we get this system where token holders now, for the first time, over a very poignant concept, can do something with their time, with their work, with their labor. In this case, it's curating a list. And it may seem super simple, but I'm going to walk you through some examples and where this can be used. And I think it will totally change your mind if there's any skeptics in the room for how potentially useful this very simple idea is. But before that, so the challenges lead to a vote. If the vote passes, then the application is removed, or the list item is removed from the list. And with many TCR designs right now, we're seeing that the list item can be challenged at any time. So if an item gets accepted, then you can challenge it at any time as a token holder. So token holders are incentivized to curate the list and do it well, because the value of the token is assumed to be somewhat reflective of the quality of the list, in theory. Individuals will want to own the token because they're going to have sway and say in the particular list. They're going to be able to hold the tokens, believing that they're potentially valuable, speculate on them, etc. So When it comes to building a TCR, they're actually very, very simple. You just have an ERC20 token and some kind of list and governance mechanic in some contract. So here's just two simple arrangements of what's available for TCRs. So we see in a most minimal arrangement, now it could actually be one contract, but in a more minimal arrangement, you see a token, maybe a registry with the governance mechanics built in. In a more complex arrangement, you would see the ERC20 token, a registry, voting mechanics, and parameterization separated. And with the complex arrangement, in terms of looking at parameters, a lot of people like to separate their initial parameters for the TCR into a separate contract. So I can go into design after, but I just thought I'd give, because I know a lot of you guys are devs, like what the hell is this? It's actually just a few contracts when we're getting down to the nature of what a TCR actually is. Now, of course, you need a good concept, and it needs to be worth it. So why are they useful? So this is, I think, almost more important to the whole thing. We have these token organizations, they're DAOs, they're curating lists, but why are these things so critical? Why are they so important? Well, because we can use them for blacklists, whitelists, ICO curation. There's a lot of different reasons and use cases to use these things. So when we're talking about blacklists, there's been a big problem where MetaMask runs with a bunch of other devs, runs a blacklist to prevent phishing across the Ethereum community. It's been a hugely successful project. But there's one slight problem in their whole system, which is they're curating the list. And they're just deciding what they believe to be phishing and what isn't. Now, while I love the MetaMask devs, and there's some sitting in the room right now, and I absolutely think what they believe is phishing, there is a question of fairness. You want a more democratic, fair system to establish that blacklist. You don't want it to be these specific devs that just decide with their software, hey, I believe this to be phishing and this isn't. And so we have these cases of ethics where humans truly want to integrate some kind of democratic format to manage a particular list. So we're starting to see that across the whole ecosystem, everyone wants to do a TCR for something, because I guarantee you, if you have an application, there's most likely a list. And if there's most likely a list, then you're most likely going to want to do it as a TCR. So you get these fantastical systems that, you know, didn't even have a good token model before, but now they have a protocol. Now they have a reason to exist. It is a list. So we get these magical scenarios now where, holy shit, I can do a security, but it isn't a security. It's never a security. It was a protocol token. It was a protocol token all along. So big realizations are happening in the community. So then we have a few, and these are ones I actually really like. So these are not people that woke up one day and said, well, my token's bullshit, so I clearly need to make it a TCR. These were people that made a TCR, and it was not bullshit. So AdChain is effectively doing a TCR to decide reputable advertisers, because it's a real problem in the advertising world. And right now there's weird centralized systems that handle that particular kind of thing, and they're ripe for disruption. Masari's doing a TCR that's going to curate which ICOs are truly transparent, truly reputable, truly maybe not a good investment, because that would be investment advice, but maybe, you know, well governed in any regard. And then Delphi is arbitrating. They're going to do an arbitration network, and they need a list that decides, hey, these are the reputable arbitrators, and these are not. So effectively, these are some really interesting and nice use cases for curating a list that I quite like. So when we get into TCRs, another thought I want to leave you with is these are safer testing grounds for DAOs and for DAO technology. Because the TCR is not pooling a huge amount of ether in a contract and deciding where it goes, we have a safe, somewhat reasonable testing ground to say, okay, we're going to try some DAOs, but they're going to do something that's kind of soft in the sense that it's just curating a list. The worst thing that's going to happen here is they really fuck up the list, which for a lot of softer systems, which I'll explain in a second, is completely fine. So that's just another thing I want to leave you with. So when we talk about what are the problems with TCRs, what is plaguing these organizations? And I know that the DAO memories for some of you are fresh. You know, it was like our 9/11. It was really quite the day. So once again, these TCRs are not collusion resistant. So 51% attacks and collusion attacks are going to be common. And for all you who don't know what that is, you just buy the majority share of the tokens, and then you just crush the list. And don't think that there's people who will just buy the shit out of a crowd sale and crush a TCR because it's a good concept. Trolling at any level, at any expense, is incredibly possible. So, you know, Barry Silbert's pretty bored, and definitely would be crushing some TCRs on Ethereum. So when we talk about coordination attacks, in the current designs of TCRs, no one's working through schedules. So problem with human coordination that we see all the time is if you just allow things to happen at random, and it will, people may be asleep or on vacation or in a peculiar position where they're supposed to be doing the human work of making sure that this list is good and doesn't blow up, but they're just away or not aware. And so we have these really complex coordination attacks where someone may launch a very large attack you know, during an event or during a particular time of year or during a particular area of time when humans are just distracted and they just don't want to touch Ethereum. So we get odd coordination attacks that, while unlikely, can work and can highly disrupt the TCR working well. So even if it's not an attack to destroy it, it's certainly going to disrupt it from actually performing its duty of curating the list. So we have coordination delay. So basically, when we talk about voting, human beings are known statistically to be incredibly lazy. The most lazy you can ever dream of. And so simply, some proposals can just get through because people will not vote. They will miss the boat. They will simply not vote because they don't care, or you know, they didn't have time, or they just thought, well, I thought everyone else would vote. So just like we see today in common democracy, these will plague the TCRs. Maybe not at first. Maybe when the dream is big and the list is going and you know everything's operational, human beings are all excited and they're ready to vote and they're ready to try out their new democratic system. And they're so happy. And then just as any other democratic system before it, it will slowly dissipate, and they will slowly not care to the point where eventually things just don't work well. And the problems of democracy once again plague another organization, just this time on Ethereum, in tokens. Now that's in my opinion, but I truly think it will happen. So then we have continual spamming attacks. So effectively just filling up the TCR with a bazillion applications. Now initially this may not cause too many problems, but if the TCR is designed in a particular way where applications can go in and they can be accepted without being challenged, then you have a real problem on your hands because I can flood it with all these applications and people may just not sit there through time to actually challenge all the applications and actually vote on all the challenges for all the applications. So you can effectively flood it, completely disrupt it, and maybe one of your challenges or one of your attacks can get through. Now remember, the applications are staked, but I do believe that certain lists will be low stake lists because requiring a massive stake just to get an application on a list may seem completely unreasonable, that concept, and those lists will be hugely targeted by this particular attack. Now I have fixes for a lot of these, but there is one fix that is definitely not present. That's definitely a difficult sell, and I'll go over that in a second. So there's no clear forking mechanics as well. We haven't really decided yet what is the right way to effectively copy a list, copy the token, copy the whole DAO, and maybe just not invite the attacker. So when we talk about forking DAOs or forking organizations, we're really thinking about how can we just kind of move over here but without the asshole who just trolled the DAO. And so we haven't really clearly decided yet this is the right way to do it. And what's going to happen is I think we're going to have a plethora of potential mechanics for this. But for now, some of these things are not ready to be copied. They're not ready to be forked. So unfortunately, they will be 51% attacked or colluded against, and they probably will, at least the initial instantiation of the list will crumble. And so the last thing is there's no clear social data to determine reasonable default parameters. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about what happened with the DAO as well. So when building DAOs and governance systems, a big problem is setting the initial parameters. What's the base level quorum? What are the initial numbers that are going to make this thing work and work well and work reasonably? And so because we simply don't have a lot of social data, we're going to set initial parameters that will most likely be wrong and unreasonable, and it will plague the initial lists or DAOs that are created. And so when we think about the DAO, a big problem was the white paper was written, it was released, defaults were recommended, and they were used, but with no data at all to suggest why these defaults should be the way they are. Sure, you can guess, you can make a reasonable guess, but is your guess good enough? Is it good enough to actually make this thing work? Now, with TCRs, we get an interesting opportunity to try many, many, many forms and many, many, many kinds, and at a low risk. For most of these people, it doesn't really matter if the list works well right now. So we're going to get a lot of incredible social data back, which is actually incredibly more important, I argue, than most of the technology that we're building. It's more interesting to see how humans are going to work with these technologies than actually the technology itself. These are pretty straightforward to build. They're really simple. And I bet anyone who can code here can probably string up a pretty decent one pretty quickly. So when we talk about fixing these problems, there's actually pretty straightforward fixes for most of it. So for 51% attacks, depending on what you're doing the list for, if you only use the list for subjective targets, meaning the list itself is being interpreted by humans, and it's being basically established as this list over here definitely is the real one. This one's definitely the attacked one. So we're just going to assume this is the right list and move on with our lives. When we have these subjective cases, it's completely fine to have 51% attacks, because effectively we can copy all the contracts, we can move over here and just say, hey attacker, we know all your accounts because you just coordinated a massive attack against us, and you exposed yourself right here. So we're just going to come over here and not invite you. And it's quite simple. So we can move over to a new contract, but there is a problem with that for different kinds of systems, but not for subjectively targeted ones. So I'll get into more about that in a second. So when we talk about coordination attacks, if the contracts themselves implement rigid scheduling and incentivization models, we're actually going to solve a lot of problems in terms of coordination. Right now, on most of the TCR contracts, you can make applications and challenges at will. This is okay, but the problem is, if I've got all these applications coming in throughout the months, then that means as a human, I need to sit here all the time and monitor this thing and make sure that I'm actually doing my duty. In democracy, or in democratic democracies, we see that we can't do this. We simply can't. We need to schedule, hey, over here is the time we do the applications, and over here is the time we do the challenges. Now, that may seem simple, but if you don't contractually enforce it, what ends up happening is, imagine if everyone in Paris at will had to go out and vote when an application came in from the government. It would be ridiculous. People would say, are you kidding? I would have to stop work. I would have to leave. I'm at a cafe right now. I simply can't do it. And so it literally crumbles. So some rigid scheduling can really go a long way to help humans coordinate. They know at this time they're supposed to deal with the applications, and at this time they're supposed to deal with the challenges. Now, when we're talking about coordination delays, we're talking about things like implementing incentives to make sure that, okay, these people are going to vote, and they're going to vote regularly. And the reason why is because maybe if they don't vote, they lose their tokens. Maybe if they don't vote, they lose stake. When you have things at stake, people seem to do things a lot more. And right now, token holders, what they have at stake is potentially the reflective value of their token. But really, for a lot of people, that's a highly abstract concept. They're not directly losing anything yet, and I don't believe they're going to act well in an organization because of it. So definitely adding incentive mechanisms to keep participation high is one thing. And on a UX side, governance itself, in my opinion, is a lot of user experience. It's basically, what is the experience of running the organization? What is the day-to-day experience of voting? Is it a game, or is it literally like a Facebook, interaction? The thing is, if we don't gamify the user experience for governance, people will not be addicted to actually participate in these systems. Twitter, Facebook, all these complex social networks that we use, all the complex apps that we use, they've gamified the hell out of their app to keep participation high. We can leverage this same technique in governance to make sure that human beings participate and they want to participate. So gamifying UI will go a long way in terms of making sure that we have the participation that we need. And then lastly, delegated voting. I think this will be a critical marker for coordination resistance. So effectively, if I'm just a naive user and investor, I'm not going to want to sit here and do the voting. I just won't. I just want to invest in the token. I like the idea, but I simply will not do the voting itself. This is where it's a perfect case for the liquid democracy or democratic voting system. So all you have to do is just have services set up when you set up your TCR that say, you know what, we'll act in a responsible way with these philosophies and these principles, with these delegation principles, and you can delegate to us and we'll just manage it. And the thing is, it is semi-centralized, but it's participatory centralization. It's not demanded, it's opt-in. So that solves a lot of horrible coordination problems when you can just delegate to a trusted party, but only in the sense that I'm willing to do this. So lastly, we have spamming attacks, which is basically going to happen regardless. Someone's going to try and spam this, whether it be a wealthy troll, a very great Bitcoiner, someone who buys a lot of Ripple. We just don't know yet who the attacker is, but we could assume it's these people. And so effectively, we have to deal with this somehow. So one way to do that is to just make the applications fail unless otherwise specified. So this way, they're effectively just wasting stake, wasting money, and you flip it on its head. The reason why I say this is because certain TCRs are being designed in the reverse. They're being designed to accept applications unless otherwise challenged. Now, that may seem interesting and good, but the problem is that if you want a very high quality list and you want very high quality items, you really need to know that people are going to support that, they're going to add it in. And there is reasons for both of these systems. Now, in the spamming attack case, if they set the stake high enough, they're going to say, well, they're just going to spam it and they're going to lose money on the staking. But many lists will not be able to set the stake high enough because their use case does not warrant a 50 Ether application. It just doesn't. It's just ridiculous. So you need to, when you're designing the token-created registry, basically include this, incorporate this thinking into the logic, just to make sure that, am I meeting the use case right? If it's an ICO use case, they're going to pay 50 Ether. They want to be on that list. They're willing to stake that. Whereas if it's over here and it's maybe, I don't know, what websites does this particular company really like, that you're not going to pay 50 Ether for that. It's a completely different use case. So it'll depend on your design. So no clear forking mechanics. If you design the lists and the tokens in a copyable manner, like the Mini-Me token, where you can effectively go, hey, I have contract here with state at this position. We'll move over here to this new contract, and we'll just reference the previous state of the old contract, but we'll move on to new state and new logic here. Then you get this nice copyable system. So we can do this with tokens right now with the Mini-Me token, which is totally ideal for governance, particularly voting in contract systems. But now moving forward, we also need to make that list copyable. We need to make those items copyable. So when designing these lists, I think that's something to really consider, and making it transitionable over time. And that way, you can have this beautiful lineage of state, and you're not too worried about, well, we got a fork, like, holy shit, I've got to design a new contract now just so we can move over, and it's going to kill the service and kill the experience. And so, as for the social data, experimenting heavily before production is obviously recommended. But the thing is, many test lists on mainnet with incentive systems in place will be really, really interesting. You shouldn't just test on testnet, not with these things. You want it to be as real as possible during the test and the simulation. So you should put it on mainnet. You should test with real ether if you actually think your systems are good enough and you think it's warranted. It will not be an accurate simulation if you put it on a testnet. People will not act the same. They will not react the same to the governance system itself. So lastly, what we can't fix, which is address consistency cannot be maintained after a majority 51% attack. So under the event of an attack, the attack happens over here, contract X. Then we move over to contract Y, and that fixes the attack because effectively we moved over here and we've removed the attacker. But now we have another problem. We're at this address and not that address. Now, for interpretive subjective systems or subjectively targeted systems, that's completely fine. We'll just interpret that this is the new system. But for systems that are contractually reliant on this particular token-created registry to do a specific thing, they're fucked. They now need to integrate a centralized body in which to interpret. That's a central point of failure, thus removing some of the power, some of the, the best part about this decentralized system. So this is a hard problem that exists currently with any DAO that you see. Now, the thing is, there might be solves for this eventually, but right now, it is extremely hard to interpret what a real DAO is and what the attack DAO is. What is the DAO that's legitimate and what is not legitimate? You can try to make contractual systems. You can try to make reputation-based systems. You can try to make identity-based systems. But it's incredibly difficult to decipher this particular question, and it usually involves human interpretation somewhere. So this particular instance can be solved. I do believe it can be solved. It's just, I think the solve will not be exactly what we want. I think it will end up becoming something of a middle ground that we're willing to accept in order to push these DAOs along and use them in contractual systems. So right now, this is something really to consider if you're thinking about doing a token-created registry. And lastly, when we talk about token value equaling list quality, so this is a really interesting assumption, and it's one that I'm just super fascinated by. When Mike Golden wrote the initial TCR white paper, he talked about how effectively the value of the token, which is this is a critical aspect of the system, the value of the token is maintained, increased, or reflective in some way of the quality of the list. And the thing is I don't know about that. I mean, really, it would seem maybe intuitive to suggest that that is the case. But in terms of economics, it's really hard to derive that to be true, to derive that to actually be the case. What if I have a list that's incredible quality, but the value continues to drop even though they continue to be producing what they say? Does this argument still hold true? Now, the interesting part about this is, even though this is an interpretive and kind of a crazy thing, can we say the same thing about Ethereum? Is the value of that Ethereum token actually reflective of what we're doing? Or is this the work of speculation? Or is it somewhere in between? We really don't know. But if you're depending, Ethereum does not necessarily depend that Ether be worth a lot of money. Whereas the TCR is somewhat dependent within its game theoretical system to maintain, to try to support that value. So when we talk about breaking TCRs, when we talk about what are the critical assumptions one has to make in order to make this function, this seems like a very interesting attack on itself. And so I think we just want to consider this going forward. I don't necessarily think this is necessarily a bad thing or whether there's a clear answer to this question. But it's something you want to ask yourself both about Ethereum and both about token-created registries as a whole. That's basically the presentation. That's my Twitter. These are the projects I work on. The last name is my band. I'm actually playing in Paris later on. This is my shirt. Yeah, okay. It's great. We're also playing Stockholm and London. So GovernX is the stealth governance project of which is not released, and there's no website. ETH.js is my Ethereum JavaScript stuff, which I wanted to present, but I thought this is a little more relevant than JavaScript stuff. Consensus, the giant thing. And which I've been a part of for a very long time. And then check out this new module I wrote, ETH.js Extras, because it's very short notation to do all the Ethereum stuff you really want to do. It's going to save you a lot of time if you use it, but it's not in production yet. So don't use it in production yet, okay? But thank you. Yeah. All right. So how much time do we have for questions? Do we have time or no? We have time? Okay, great. Okay, questions. Yeah. Sorry? Oh, when will it be? I got to get the dates. It's sometime, I think April something, April 1st to 5th area. Yeah. I'll look it up. I'll figure it out. I'll post it in this Slack, you know. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Okay, do we have someone doing a mic or?
The mic is. Can you talk?
Okay.
Hello.
Oh, hi, Frankie. Yeah.
What is Parallels?
What is Parallels?
Yeah.
That's the band.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry. This is really
okay.
causing quite a stir, isn't it? Okay. Yeah. I just thought I'd tag it on at the end. I thought it'd be fun. Okay. Any particularly pressing questions about token governance? Okay. Okay. Yep.
So, what are your thoughts on TCRs of TCRs of TCRs? Because discoverability of alternatives, it's very important for the value of tokens, right?
Yes, totally. So when we have a TCR and it forks, or we have a TCR that there's maybe one token but multiple lists, exactly. It is the value now completely less because we both ostracize a particular token holder from the list, and now that token is still there but not worth maybe nearly as much. Will forking lower the value? And that's maybe the target goal, is to effectively just disrupt the whole system itself, to just dilute and destroy the value. Absolutely. I think forking in this particular manner can be extremely destructive to the value and thus become a game theoretical flaw within the organizational system. So I think it's something to look out for, and I think it's something to account for with users, with the people you're working with, because if you don't, you may not have a good answer for, we've forked 6 times and our token is now, a small amount of people doing this one particular list. So absolutely, I think it have tremendous impact on potential value. There's no question. Yeah. Yep.
Hi Nick. Thanks for your presentation. Enjoyed it.
Yeah,
just a question. I mean, some things on the internet, a lot of people search for lists.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, for example, the top 20 sci-fi films.
Yeah.
Can you see this being used in that kind of context?
Right. So I think anywhere you have a list that human beings are in a position to say, this is of great importance, or this is clearly good or important, I think you can definitely structure one of these organizations around. Now, it will become so menial and so easy for someone to deploy a list for whatever you want that you could totally do a list for sci-fi films. There's really nothing stopping you aside from 40 or 50 cents. But the trouble will be, can you structure your community? Can you structure the people around that particular topic to do this work because of a token, or because they care, because they want to? I think there's many cases to do a TCR, but never do a token sale. Just give it to good people and then faucet it through those people. That may totally be the right way to work these decentralized organizations. Sure, the initial spreading of the tokens was centralized, but it was to people that obviously care about this particular thing and are obviously willing to continue caring about this thing for a long time. So it will be interesting to see what we try with them, but in terms of, can we do a TCR for a sci-fi movie list? Absolutely. Will it work well? Will it be the right mechanism to do that? Or could they have just done that through some emails and a website? I don't know. I mean, it sounds like maybe the case where you could just do it through some emails and a website over, the alternative. But who knows? I can't tell you at this time, but I think it's possible. There's a lot of crazy sci-fi fans out there that are willing to stake money on what they think is the right movie. So, I think it's possible. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Oh. Okay. Right. Yeah, okay, so the question... Yes. Yeah, so I do think, so to repeat the question, it's just, you know, can we solve the address consistency problem by effectively having the owner of the contract or a particular change in our system to address this? And I think, yeah. Yes, yeah. Not the TCR itself, but a service potentially using the TCR, yeah. So in this case, of course, you can structure that service contract to have an owner, to have someone who's going to determine or interpret what the right DAO is. You can do that. Is there a way, once again, from a data perspective, from a logical computing perspective, to actually determine whether before or after the attack happens, this is the right list and this is not? It's difficult to say. I think as we have identity systems basically maturing over time, what you might be able to say is the attacker could potentially just be a collusionary set of fake identities or fake accounts, and you might be able to, based upon a complex reputation system, shift over to the other non-attack DAO, the DAO which does not have the attacker. So there might be some way from a data or computer science perspective to do this. I think, but right now it's yet to be seen that there's an elegant system to do this, or one that we can truly trust, or that's easy to build with our existing system. So that would be kind of my answer to you on that one. If that doesn't address it, though, we'll discuss it later. You know, because I love talking to you anyway. So you know, yeah, I know, like, you know, 25% of this room is very funny. Yeah. Okay. So, other questions?
So I have a question.
Okay.
How do you spread new tokens properly? So, for example, going back to the top sci-fi movies list.
Yeah.
So the users that are using the tokens and voting for movies to not come on the list.
Yeah.
How do you get new tokens to them? And I mean, if you're a user and a bad movie comes along, you're sure there's gonna come a worse movie after that. So there are some game dynamics going on. You'll hold on to your token just so you'll be able at some later point blacklist some movie that is even worse than that.
Yeah, totally. So there's going to be a lot of potentially very negative actors in these things as well. I think there'll be a lot of people that will conduct, you know, methods of social manipulation and trolling later on just to do that because they can. Now, I think with the voting and the challenging the applications, when we talk about dispersing the tokens, what we're getting into is what seems reasonable to disperse effectively the power of this organization. What is the right mechanism? I think for the sci-fi list, I think doing a crowd sale would be really silly. I think in that case, you may just want to give a lot of tokens to the top 100 sci-fi people in the world that just love sci-fi movies, the critics, etc. You may want to give all of them tokens to start. Now, they can give them away, they can move them around, they can give them to bad actors. But the thing is, I think in a lot of cases, you're actually going to get a situation where they're going to have a lot of fun curating that list and arguing with each other and potentially producing this list. It's what they do for their lives. It is their reputation. And not only that, we can see all of their votes verifiably in cold blocks, you know? So I think like it really, really depends. It depends on how you want to disperse tokens. It depends on what your use case is. But in general, we're going to see some really, really interesting use cases, and as well potentially multi-list use cases where you know, there's 3 or 4 lists one has to traverse in order to get an application through. Or there's many applications for a single system, and they're all working in tandem against each other, potentially competing with each other to produce a better list in the end. So there's much to discover here with this particular pattern. Yeah, if that answers your question. Yeah, cool. Any other questions, thoughts? Okay, great. All right, thank you.